Good morning and welcome to the first meeting of the Citizens Participation and Public Petitions Committee in 2026. We have just 6 meetings left after this to deal with really still a very considerable number of petitions. And it's a difficult task given the importance underlying many of the petitions. And so a lot of what we're trying to do now is identify what we can still hope to achieve in the balance of time left to us. Our first item of business this morning is to take a decision on items 5 and 6 being held in private. Our committee members happy to do that. We will consider the evidence and determination about the petitions we've considered today. Are we content? Agreed. We are, thank you. Our second item today is the next in our series of themed sessions with Cabinet Secretaries in order to try and do justice to as many petitions as possible. And this morning's themed session is on energy. And this, of course, relates to energy-related petitions, which I have to say, other than by the word energy, are hardly connected at all in terms of their scope and range of concerns, unlike some of the justice or the health ones where there was a kind of obvious thematic. So, and quite complicated and sometimes quite technical issues as well. We're joined by the Cabinet Secretary for Climate Action and Energy, Gillian Martin, and by Scottish Government officials, Catherine Williams, who's the Deputy Director Onshore Electricity Strategy and Consents, to Robert Martin, who is the Head of Legislative Change and Governance, and by Antonio Georgieva, Head of Battery Energy Storage Systems. Am I allowed to say a plague in my constituency? But nonetheless, no doubt these issues will be touched upon as we progress. A very warm welcome to you all. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Our evidence session this morning is going to cover a number of petitions. 1864, which is to increase the ability of communities to influence planning decisions for onshore wind farms. 1885, make offering community shared ownership mandatory for all wind farm development planning proposals. 2095, to improve the public consultation processes for energy infrastructure projects. 2109, to halt any further pump storage hydro schemes on Scottish lochs holding wild Atlantic salmon. 2157, to update planning advice for energy storage issues and ensure that it includes clear guidance for the location of battery energy storage systems near residences and communities. 2159, to halt the production of hydrogen from fresh water. And 2160, to introduce an energy strategy. And I understand, Cabinet Secretary, you'd like to start the proceedings off this morning just by making a short introductory statement.
Yes, I thought that would be helpful just to sort of try and bring them all together, Convener, and I'm delighted to be here today. It's the first time I've been in front of this committee, so I'm very glad to be here. And this is a matter that, of course, is of great importance to communities, and I completely understand that. The renewables in general, I mean, and we are largely talking about renewables and low carbon energy in all these petitions. They represent a large economic opportunity, but they have to be managed in a way that brings people with them. And I'm very seized of the fact that people need to see the benefit of the energy developments in Scotland as much as possible. And very much since I've been in post originally as Energy Minister, I've been trying my best to make sure that we have all the levers, both at reserve level and devolve level, to make sure that that is the case. Investing in new energy generation and the grid to ensure energy can securely get to where it's needed is essential for energy security. And it's also essential for making sure that we capitalise on the low carbon energy that Scotland's uniquely placed to generate. It will create thousands of jobs. It will create lots of opportunities for Scottish businesses. And the existing transmission upgrades are required. To be honest, they're long overdue because the transmission network is actually very, very old. And we'll have seen in various weather events, obviously we're getting more ferocious weather events happening over Scotland, that it can be unstable in places. And thankfully last week, in the storms in the North East and the Highlands, the snowstorms, we had very few outages and they were short. But last year that was not the case, and the year before that was not the case as well. Energy systems regulation is largely reserved to the UK Government, and such as the issues that I'll only be able to seek to influence the UK Government, and I can outline them as I talk about the various petitions. And I am aware that communities are concerned about the scale of development and the impact it would have on them as householders. Battery storage was mentioned as well, and I'm happy to talk about that, of course, in the detail of what we are doing to try and look at some of the issues that have been raised to us. It's important to air all the themes on these petitions. I thank everyone who's gone to the trouble of putting forward a petition. I'm very keen to discuss all the themes that have been mentioned. I have had ministerial responsibility for this for 3 years. We're making the case to successive UK governments that there must be mandatory community benefit associated with developments, and much, much better and earlier community engagement by developers. And I would actually like to see some updated guidance coming on that, and also mandating of that come from the UK government. And there have been developments in that space as well in the last year or so with the new UK government, that I'm able to tell the committee about. Recent changes made to UK legislation will now allow for the introduction of mandatory pre-application engagement and other improvements in the consenting process for large-scale applications. And our planning and consenting systems also ensure that issues of cumulative impact on our natural environment will be considered in the decision-making process. Communities also tend to share in our nation's energy wealth. Last year, communities were offered £30 million a year in community benefits, and we're supporting for them to invest in their own community energy projects through a community renewable energy scheme, that's CARES, and I've ensured that CARES is resourced to keep pace with the increasing demand for community energy. The Ministerial Code, of course, does limit ministers' abilities to directly engage with communities on particular planning applications or developments that may become planning applications. But I'm very pleased to be able today to answer general questions on the topics in the round, Convener. I'm looking forward to answering the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A couple of points just before I bring colleagues in. I suppose, although I talked about the petitions today being quite technically varied, an underlying theme, sometimes prominent, sometimes discrete, is the whole issue of community engagement. So I think that is a loose theme that comes across all of them. But just before we move on, I'm just talking about last week's weather event, when you said that the outages had actually been, we'd been mercifully much more fortunate than we were a year ago. Was that in any way due to resilience planning in the interim, or would you say we were just luckier this time than we were in the weather that we had this year?
It was a combination of a couple of things. Powdery snow, rather than the sort of snow that sticks to any of the transmission kind of like overhead lines. This is my very layman's assessment, given that I was in the SCOR meetings associated with that. Lack of wind. It wasn't particularly windy on the whole. If you look at Storm Arwen, Storm Arwen was particularly bad in terms of outages, because there was this unusual pattern of wind which actually brought down trees in winter when there wouldn't have been wind coming from a particular directions normally. So trees grow to withstand the wind that they expect. Every day is a school day when you're sitting and speaking to people dealing with these outages. So there was a lot of tree fall in the Storm Arwen, which actually brought down a lot of lines as well. So in this occasion, it was obviously mainly snow. It was a particular type of snow, and there wasn't as much as the winds that would bring down power lines.
Okay, right, thanks. And my second point just is, I know that you've just recently written to the committee and to the Net Zero Committee in relation to a change of ministerial responsibility. And I just thought it would be helpful for this committee to understand what the process was, or what the thinking was behind the change in the responsibility at this stage in the life of the Parliament.
Yeah, it's something that we put in train a few months ago, because we've obviously been consulting on the good practice principles associated with applications, and I felt that because the minister, I felt that, and this was the sort of like the case that I put, having the responsibility for the consents put me in a situation where I felt that I needed to be able to divorce the policy associated with energy with the eventual decision, and that was best to be with the planning minister, because that way that I could be confident there couldn't be any perception of influence on me. And I think that this is really important for communities who have concerns to understand that if there was, say, I'll give a hypothetical example. Project X, which a community, say, in the Western Isles, have a group that have concerns about it and want to speak to me about the community engagement associated with this. If there was a perception at the end of the process that consent wasn't given to Project X, the applicant could say, well, Gillian Martin was swayed by that because she met with this community group who obviously influenced her. And I don't want anything like that to be happen. So it works both ways, whether something's consented to or something's not consented to. I wanted to be able to make sure that I can engage with every stakeholder in terms of the good practice principles around community engagement. And of course, with the Planning and Infrastructure Bill in the UK government, which I was confident was going to give us the powers to be able to mandate on community engagement. And I had a sense that that would be difficult for me to do as fully as I wanted to do. So thankfully, I had the agreement of the planning minister that he would take on responsibility for the ECU and the consents, and the First Minister who agreed with me that I needed to be able to fully engage in all the good practice principles and the developments that the Planning and Infrastructure Bill would allow us to take forward.
Thank you very much for that. Well, let's move on to public consultation process for energy infrastructure, and Maurice Golden's going to lead us in this session.
Thank you, Convener. Welcome, Cabinet Secretary. I think within this process of energy infrastructure, whether it be transmission or indeed perhaps more localised energy infrastructure, I think there is probably a gap in knowledge around which actors are present. So, you know, I think it might be helpful in public to set that out. You know, so in terms of energy, you've got NESO, which operates the system overall. Then you have transmission owners who own the infrastructure, and they are instructed by Ofgem as the regulator who operates under UK government licence conditions to build said infrastructure, which they must justify on the basis of those licence conditions. Then you have DNOs, distribution network operators, who are perhaps the more local, if you like, the transmission owners of the trunk roads and the DNOs of the B roads. And then you have retail, which is what most consumers see, but all those actors are doing things differently. And certainly from, if you think about 2 years ago, every party was supportive of both an expansion in said renewables, particularly offshore, and also supportive of public consultation as ingrained in the 1998 Aarhus Convention. But I think what we're seeing today is a conflict between the environmental principles of public participation and the energy infrastructure. And I think it might be helpful, Cabinet Secretary, given that I've outlined everyone else's role, to outline the Scottish Government's role in that process.
Yeah. And I think, I want to thank Maurice Golden for setting out the landscape of what it looks like, because it's very important that there's different roles and there's a lot of different players in all of this. And of course, there's reserved responsibilities associated particularly with transmission. And you rightly point out that the Electricity Act is the sort of like governing piece of legislation around how we all the regulations associated with consenting. And the Scottish Government in our Energy Consents Unit has to conform to everything that's in the Electricity Act. And we also, NESO obviously have responsibility for what the transmission network looks like and what it has to look like in order to facilitate I suppose the getting of the electricity to all the places where it needs to go throughout the whole of the UK. And the previous UK government, of course, worked with NESO, and then they've put out their plans for upgrading the transmission infrastructure. The role of the Scottish Government is that we have the final consents, the ministers have the final consents, once it's been through this whole process, which of course is regulated at UK level as to how that actually happens, but of course we've got planning powers. For any developments over 50 megawatts at the moment, that goes to the Energy Consents Unit in the Scottish Government. Anything under 50 megawatts is decided at local authority level by councillors, effectively, in the local authority. And I mean, we are actually consulting in the moment in changing that threshold to see what people might think about changing, giving more responsibility to councils to up to a level beyond 50 megawatts as well. We've got some of the most stringent environmental conditions in Scotland. You have to, there are a series of documents that and assessments that have to be put forward by applications into the Energy Consents Unit. And there also is what we don't dictate, and we can't dictate, and indeed nowhere in the UK dictates to an applicant what the engineering solutions are for their application. So we assess, the ECU assesses the application as submitted, right? So say Project X wants to have power lines, transmission lines, and they want to, they've set out how they want to actually, the engineering solution that they have found and how they want to site them, where they want to site them. We will assess that application as written. We won't dictate ahead of it that it has to be done in a particular way. That's for them to make an assessment. It's for them to make to put forward all the documentation associated with environmental impact assessments. Then that will go out to all the statutory consultees, which includes local councils. So even if it's over 50 megawatts and it's coming to the ECU, local authorities will still be a statutory consultee. If local authorities don't agree with the application as written, then it will go to a public inquiry. I'm just looking to my officials. So public inquiry, and that happens automatically. But if it goes through the Energy Consents Unit, that they'll do all the assessment of all the documentation and assessments and plans that are put forward by that applicant, and then they were in accordance with all the regulations and the Electricity Act, will give advice with an assessment of what all the statutory consultees have said to the minister that's making the final determination. And it's very important to realise that if you're looking at that advice, you can go back to your officials and you can question certain things about, why are you giving me this advice when this has happened, this person. You've got to be very, very certain that when you make a determination that you're not going against any kind of legal advice. Because if you go against any legal advice, then that maybe gives an opportunity for say you turn something down, right? You look at it, and my officials have given, or our officials have given the minister advice to consent to something and all the reasons why. And the minister looks at it and he goes, nah, don't like it. They need to be very, very certain that they're on solid ground legally there, because it might get taken to court and it might be appealed. And it might be taken to court. So that's the process. It's a very, very rigorous process. Many developers say that we take too long to make determinations. We try our best. We've actually doubled the capacity of people working in the ECU to streamline the process. I think that's good for developers, but it's also good for communities because they get a quicker decision and they know what they're dealing with and it doesn't drag on for years.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I do agree that planning does take too long at times and isn't helpful in an investment environment. Would it be fair to sum up the Scottish Government's role in this space is broadly to set the narrative? So, you know, which has been an expansion in renewables, you know, Scotland being #1 in the world for climate change, and secondly, determining planning decisions, particularly those above 50 megawatts. Would that be essentially the Scottish Government's role?
I would agree with that, but I would also expand that and say that like, as you rightly said in your opening remarks there, it's Scottish Parliament. I mean, Scottish Parliament agreed to NPF4, the National Planning Framework 4, which actually set out the ambition is the wrong word, set out that narrative that we want to facilitate as much low-carbon energy in order to reduce our emissions, but also for energy security reasons. I mean, the Scottish Government doesn't have responsibility for energy security, but we have an interest, obviously, in energy security as well. But we also have an interest in Scottish economic growth as well, and making sure that we provide jobs for the future and that we have an energy industry in Scotland which needs to be able to adapt and pivot to new energies coming forward. So yeah, it sets a narrative, but Parliament's also set a narrative as well by agreeing to National Planning Framework 4, which gives guidance to planning authorities throughout the land, both at local authority level and more generally, what's expected when they're making planning applications.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. And I do think that the risk of both black and brown start requirements is far higher than it ever has been, and therefore we do require the transmission to do that. But before I move off energy infrastructure, I think it would be amiss to do so without recognising the plight of those communities, because both the UK and Scottish governments historically have set up a system where you have a high amount of energy generation far away from demand, and that means that there is a requirement to transport said electricity a long way to demand, and that's not the community's fault, because by the time that they heard about those requirements it was a bit too late. And I think to be frank, both governments failed in that community engagement until it was far too late, as did the other actors, which would have been National Grid, Ofgem and others at the time. But yeah.
Ferguson, did you want to follow in the back of this particular area before?
No, just wait till...
That's fine. Okay, Maurice, please proceed.
But I just want to take you to the Cabinet Secretary, to onshore wind, battery and solar, if you like, far more localised, some of which may go to the Scottish Government, some of may be dealt with at a council level. And I think, again, community engagement around these is quite varied. Now, NISO take a view, a UK-wide view of requirements, and have made some positive movements more recently in that direction. But I wonder your thoughts on the Scottish Government's role. You mentioned, or Cabinet Secretary mentioned, the cumulative impact. And I wonder how the Scottish Government is tracking those developments at a council level, and marrying that up with what may be coming to the ECU, and also with regard to what the view might be on essentially land use, particularly loss of what might be prime agricultural land, but certainly food production land. I just wonder your thoughts in that space.
So first of all, what I want to say is I think I absolutely agree with the point that it is varied, and that's actually something that I feel very strongly it should change. I think it should be a level playing field. I don't think it should be voluntary for community engagement to happen. I think regardless of what type of energy you're producing or what you're doing in energy infrastructure, I think there should be mandatory community engagement. There should be very strict guidance associated with what good practice looks like. The Scottish Government does not have the levers in that regard to do that, but we do have good practice principles. I'll come back to what I said earlier, is that with the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, we have secured the ability for Scottish ministers to mandate community engagement, which is a very, very welcome development, because previously everything around this was voluntary. And what that means is you could have Company A who go into a community and do very early engagement, have lots of public meetings, have lots of innovative ways of talking to everyone in the community, have offers of community benefits, maybe work with them even to give them a percentage of share of the profits associated with it, or they maybe do some housing retrofit in order to bring people's bills down, or they give them some kind of, I suppose, community almost kind of endowment in order to do things that they want to do in their community. And neighbouring communities look on the opportunity that one community goes, going, that's great, I wish we had that opportunity as well. And it's a very, very positive story. But then you might have Project B of a very similar nature, run by a different company, who didn't do any of that, and leave a very, very nasty taste in the mouth. And as far as the public's concerned, they're all tarred with the same brush, right? And all it takes is one company in, say, one area of Scotland, let's just say, you know, Highlands and Islands here, one company to leave a very bad taste in the mouth, to not act in a way that brought the community with them, to not engage with the community, to not offer anything up to the community, and to, or worse, to promise things that they were going to do in that community. And then once the development is through, you don't see them for dust. And there are a number of them like that. In future years, if another developer comes in and wants to do something and they've got great intentions, they're going to be told to take a hike. And, you know, and that's the thing. So it's all of the developers, I believe, should be held to the same standard. And that should be mandated at UK level. I also want to see community benefit mandated at UK level. Not a voluntary thing, but a statutory obligation for whether it's battery storage, solar, hydro, onshore wind, that should be mandatory, so that everyone knows what they're getting, everything knows what's on offer, and they're all held to the same standard. And I think that communities, and have that engagement, decide how that is used, and they have that dialogue before the application even goes in. Because that's the thing, that dialogue has to happen well before the plans are actually made. And I believe that the developers of whatever, or transmission owners, whatever, should be working with the community and understanding the concerns, and working with them to have engineering solutions which they then put into their plans before it gets submitted to ECU or the council or whoever. And I also think that they have to be held to account on the delivery of community benefits that they have promised or said to the community that we're going to give. In terms of that assessment, so we've commissioned, the devolved governments and UK government, we've commissioned NESO to develop the strategic spatial energy plan, and they're also developing a regional energy plan for Scotland. And these are documents that are going to help shape the way in which Scotland's energy infrastructure will need to develop over the coming decades to meet demand, to meet energy security requirements, and to assess things like, you know, cumulative effect. In an individual project basis, cumulative effect is taken into account both by the councils that are determining those applications under 50 megawatts at the moment, and by the Energy Consents Unit as well. So, but what you can't do is you can't predict all the applications that you're going to have in. And if you look at battery storage, which the convener mentioned, I would say at the moment there's quite a lot of speculative, not applications, or speculative, you know, players in this. And I think communities feel, and my own community certainly feels this, they hear word of particular actors looking to to put forward developments, and they're all speculating, and there's lots of them. Not all of them are going to even go into the application process, but that is enough to make communities feel very worried about the cumulative impact. I would say that there's probably far more battery storage speculation out there than will actually come to fruition. But that doesn't stop communities feeling a little bit helpless about that. You know, so that community engagement is really, really important, and it shouldn't be voluntary. So as I say, Planning and Infrastructure Bill now gives us the opportunity to liaise with all stakeholders in this, and that includes communities, on what they think that community engagement should look like. And then we'll be in a position, once we've taken all that evidence and we've taken all that feedback, to be able to put forward to those developers, this is the mandatory community engagement that you are now subjected to, that you must do. And this has been informed by Scotland-wide consultation in the way that you've suggested maybe should have happened in years gone by.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. And I think particularly in this area, but probably in all aspects of planning, there's sometimes a circle to be squared, and I think we have to recognise that there is, whether it be energy infrastructure or particular energy projects, there might be a community feeling that says no, and you know, community engagement is still important, but ultimately it's a difficult one to square off. I just wondered on community benefit, which is talked about a lot. You know, I think of the convener's constituency in Whiteleys, which is the biggest onshore wind farm, at least previously in Europe, and much of that community benefit would go into Eaglesham and perhaps Waterfoot. But if you're in Castlemilk, which you can see the wind farm from, you perhaps do not get that community benefit because you're out with. Yet the residents of Castlemilk, you know, deprived community, you know, would require and would benefit from investment. They are paying for this infrastructure, whether it be through the transmission or the actual through green levies, yet aren't receiving the benefit. I can think of the same. You know, there's not many wind farms in Dundee. And therefore there won't be much community benefit in places like Dundee and most urban areas. I wonder if there's any thoughts around, not that the local community closest to the infrastructure loses out, but you know, there's a benefit there, but is there a way to spread that particularly to those individuals who might require it more, but certainly are paying in some way, shape or form for that?
I think that's one of the things that, well, first of all, I want it to be mandatory, right? In the first instance, I mean, the UK government has consulted on this. Consultation is closed, and I think they're assessing it. I'm very hopeful that we'll have I'm hopeful that we'll have a situation that mandates community benefit. Once that's done, all these issues of the sort that you've mentioned have to be worked out. What is community benefit, and what does the definition of community mean? Because obviously the geographical siting of the development, whatever that might be, is obviously the proximity to that community that are hosting it. And I guess that's the reason for them having community benefit, because they are hosting this development or infrastructure. And there needs to be a benefit associated with that for them, because you know it's their community, it's right on their doorstep. The point you make about Castlemilk, though, like again, line of sight of things, you know, whether or not we actually have conditions around, you know, hopefully, as I say, once the UK government, I hope, agree to mandate community benefit, this is an assessment and a piece of work that has to be, again, gone out to the public, and we assess what community benefit looks and the conditions associated with it and who gets it. I guess there's a trade-off, isn't there? Because if you spread it too thin, then people don't feel they're really getting much of anything. And the communities that are hosting the infrastructure will be like, well, it's all very well for, you know, neighbouring city over there to get community benefit. We are the ones that have got this on our doorstep. You know, so I think there will be different views around that. But the first step, Maurice, is getting this mandatory, because it's too piecemeal at the moment, you know. I mean, I hear from, I go to certain communities where there's been really, really good work done in community benefit, and they are delighted with how things have gone. But then we all hear from the communities who feel very, very aggrieved, where they've either been promised something and it's not been delivered, or they've not been engaged with properly, or they've felt that their views have been ignored. And these are things that have to be made mandatory, and the conditions and the guidance and the sort of protocol around all of those things needs to be set in stone, and it needs to be based on good practice. I should mention, I mean, we published guidance on effective community engagement in local development planning December 2024. And that came from the ECU. It was guidance on how to deliver consistent and meaningful pre-application consultation and engagement that transmission operators are expected to follow for transmission, because this was something that we were hearing about from communities so much that we couldn't wait for the UK government to mandate it. You know, we wanted to put something in place so that I could be holding these people to account, saying, well, look, you know, here's the good practice that we've asked you to do. Of course, we don't have the powers to mandate it, but it's still there, you know, and that's, you know, that's something that, but also we engaged with people around, we've got Planning Aid Scotland on an information sheet for communities. That was published in September last year as well. We've got guidance notes explaining the role of community hearings as well. But to be honest, Mr Golden, until this is actually made mandatory, the rogues that are maybe out there that people feel aggrieved at can ignore this. It needs to be made mandatory.
Speaking of roads, I think it's over to Fergus, is it?
Well, I'll bring Mr Ewing in just a second, but there are a couple of questions I'd just like to follow up on. Since Mr Golden has been kind enough to reference my constituency and the Whiteleys wind farm, of which actually we're all immensely proud, and it's been an interesting journey, because I think it is in some ways typical that I can remember very fierce objections to it from the community, and yet anybody born during the lifetime of its existence simply accepts the fact that it is there. And I suppose community benefit I might also define in the incredible leisure opportunities that have been provided in the precincts of the wind farm, with the visitor centre, the bike trails and all the other opportunities, and it's very, very widely used. Having said that, the community benefit, which Mr Golden said would all go to Eaglesham and Waterfoot, was very much what the people of Eaglesham and Waterfoot thought. As a resident of Waterfoot, can I say we're very proud of our park bench, which appears to be the only community benefit we received, because the council then moved in and decided it would assume the responsibility for the benefit. So it now goes to the entire council area, including parts of the Levendale Valley, Barhead, Upland and Neilston, who don't see the Whiteleys wind farm like the people of Castlemilk. So sometimes, as you say, I think it is the case that the benefit might be quite widely spread, and there is a suspicion in some that the council then starts to use the benefit to subsidise core spending within the council, as opposed to the incremental benefit that I think many people hoped and thought that the consequence of having the site on board would be. And I mean, I don't know if you've come across that as a more widely felt sentiment.
Absolutely. And I mean, you know, it's not going to be, we were going to consult on, when this becomes mandatory, if this becomes mandatory, we're going to consult really widely on this and good practice associated with it. But what you've just described is something that I think is actually what the problem of the community buy-in to any of these the infrastructure or these developments, because they don't see it. And we, you know, I'm almost become like a broken record. We're no longer in the realms of painting the scout hut or putting football strips into the school football team. This has to be substantial and meaningful community benefit that's actually going to improve that community. And I believe very strongly that it should be the community that decides how it's spent. I'll give you an example. So in my constituency, Aberdeen offshore wind farm as well, Vattenfall. They had a process where they actually worked with all the communities associated directly, community councils, community groups, for where their community benefit went as well, and actually but they did it quite widely. You know, so there was like, you know, communities in west of Aberdeenshire, which again can't see the sea where it is, but they got community benefit from it. And then some communities were bidding in for this money, which were right on the coast and it didn't get, you know. So I think this, it's all about balance, and it's all about, you know, and again, it's just spreading too thin. And I think it's a bit disappointing. I mean, I'm not currying favour with you, convener. It's just a bit disappointing that you only got a park bench out of it. But what a great dog walk Whiteley's is as well, as somebody who has family in the areas, and we often go up there to walk our dogs.
And the other question where I've been Ferguson is, you referred to the consultation about whether or not the megawatt should rise above the 50 level. The consultation, though, doesn't really give an indication as to where the government thinks it might usefully end up. And we know in England it's at 100 for wind and solar. There are views about whether it might be variable across different energy disciplines. But I just wonder, why was the government shy, if you like, about kind of indicating where its own thinking is in terms of where this threshold might land?
I don't really have a view. I want to hear the views of those that will be making those decisions. I want to hear the views of the communities as to what they think it should be. I think that one of the reasons why we went out to consultation is we felt that 50 megawatts is kind of getting out of date, you know, because you've got more substantial, you know, developments than that, and maybe it's just getting a little bit out of date. It's a bit too small. I think I mean, even anecdotally, there's a variety of views. Some councillors don't want that responsibility. They want it to stay as is. We'll hear from those people. But we'll also hear from the councillors and the communities that want that local decision making to be made local. And I think that it's, you know, I didn't effectively want to sort of dictate. I know you don't really dictate in a consultation. I don't want to be like one offer. I want to know what people think. Do they think it should be 100? Do they think it should be 75? Do they think it should stay the same? And then we can have a discussion, a full discussion on what's appropriate as well.
But I mean, I think what I do detect, though, is a sympathy from the government that the current level is potentially, as you put it, out of date and perhaps been overtaken by events.
Yeah, I mean, that's been put to us, and obviously we said that we were going to consult on this, and I think the time is right to do it.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Fergus Ewing.
Good morning, Minister. If I can ask you to make the journey from Castle Millcup to Inverness via the A9 and take that risk. But in the summer on the 12th of August, there was a meeting which I attended where over 300 people representing over half of the community councils in the whole of the Highland Council area met to discuss their concerns about the process. And I wanted to ask you about that first, because many of the petitions have asked for democratisation of the process and specific elements. But at the core of the objection, and I have to say, I've attended public meetings for, I think, 4 decades now, rather too many. This one, I never encountered the amount of anger at this meeting. And the source of that anger was that although many of these community councils had made very detailed objections about things like the cumulative impact of a very large number of onshore wind farms, grid improvements, substations together, their decision, even if the council, the Highland Council, turned down the application, it then went to yourself and the Scottish Government, and in almost every case, that decision was overturned. That's the feeling there, and I wonder if I could ask you for your reaction to that, and also if you can give us the statistics about the number of applications that you have you granted, or the Scottish Government has granted, and the number which you overturned. If you don't have that information now, I think lots of people would quite like to see it, because I think that's really at the root of the concern, that there's a feeling that democracy does not exist in the wind farm process in Scotland. And I say that, as you know, as we both are, as most people are in principle, of renewable energy as part of a balanced grid.
So I'll get that information. I don't have the tables in front of me about all of this, and I'll do it. We'll do it over the last few years. Yeah. Oh.
I don't have the specific time period that's associated with it, but we answered a Freedom of Information request on this basis, and the figure that I have in front of me is that in 10 of 44 cases, ministers decided against the reporter's recommendations, which is the right to do.
What about local authority decisions, though? What I'm asking is how many were overturned by the Scottish Government?
Do you mean
50 megawatt?
Well, all.
Do you mean local authority objections to an application?
Yes, when the local authority, I mean, they would deal with those under 50 megawatts. Those above 50 megawatts would go straight to the ECU. Yeah. So how many decisions taken by local authorities of applications where the output was to be under 50 megawatts were overturned by ministers?
To look back on that, because in my time as Energy Minister, and indeed obviously Dr Allen was Energy Minister when I became Cabinet Secretary, I cannot recall calling in a decision that's been made at a local authority.
Okay. Well, I'm just conveying the feeling. I think underlying the feeling for many people is that whilst, as I've stated, I think most of the people present were supportive in general of moving towards a renewable energy system, that there's growing concern in Scotland and Britain, I think, that no one is asking or answering the questions, how much wind energy is enough? How much is too much? What is the actual cost? Constraint payments last year, 98% of which were attributable to Scottish wind farms, exceeded £1 billion. The strike prices today announced are just over £90, which is 11% higher than the last round and are higher than electricity costs are in the UK at the moment. And the target is 43 gigawatts, the UK target, with an ambition of 50 gigawatts. The average energy usage is 44 gigawatts. So the new system is going to rely entirely on wind. What happens when the wind doesn't blow and demand is high? And it nearly happened on the 8th of January, where there was Dunkelflaute conditions of low wind, no sunshine, high demand, and the margin of error was 1.3%, I think around about 400 or 500 megawatts. In other words, there was very nearly blackouts on the 8th of January 25. I think they came within a whisker of blackouts. Now, if that's to be avoided, Minister, what does the Scottish Government say about how we balance the grid? Must there not be some element of gas or nuclear? Because can we rely on interconnectors where increasingly countries in Europe are looking to secure their own supply and use their own supply and cease or reduce the amounts exported to the UK, on which the UK is completely reliant in Dunkelflaute circumstances? So the energy policy, which was promised in 23, hasn't been published for a variety of excuses. So we don't know the answer to this. And I do think it's such a big question that we must really get an idea of where the Scottish Government thinks we should go in this, and certainly before the next election.
Every point that Fergus Jones just made, I have absolute sympathy with, because that's why we've asked the NISO to do the strategic planning work that I mentioned previously to Maurice Golden, because the assessment that they'll be undertaking will give us that detail. It's all about energy security. Can I talk about the constraint payments? I think that constraints payments are an absolute scandal, to be honest. And that's one of the reasons that we need an improved capacity in the grid. Why are we paying developers to stop generating? I think what most people in Scotland would find that absolutely just unbelievable that that's the case, because that energy, that electricity has nowhere to go. The grid upgrades will allow more of that electricity, obviously, to go in the grid and to be used. But also, there's opportunities for off-takers more locally to take that electricity as well. And that's something that we're looking into Scottish Government in terms of like heat networks, the work that Mary McCallan is doing, and any kind of like high intensity industries that we're trying to encourage them to come to Scotland as part of what the work that Kate Forbes is doing with the Green Industrial Strategy as well. But that work that NISO, that we've asked NISO to do, is going to be absolutely fundamental to how we go forward in this. We need to ascertain where the weak spots are, where the energy security and resilience weak spots are, and we need to plan accordingly. And that's very important work that needs to be done to inform that. So that future strategic spatial energy plan is effectively the work that we have commissioned NISO to do in order to be able to ascertain exactly where in the Scottish grid do we have weak spots, where in terms of generation do we have weak spots, and then you can plan on that basis with the expert advice that they're going to supply us.
I think it was, well, it was Winston Churchill who once put it very pithily. He said, when it comes to electricity supply, the solution is variety and variety alone. So does the Scottish Government recognise that we cannot rely solely on wind and solar and other types of renewables such as hydro and battery storage? There simply won't be enough storage. There cannot be enough storage within the next 10, 15 years at least to possibly avoid constraint payments. And the constraint payments, if they weren't, they're part of the system. And if there weren't constraint payments, the strike price wouldn't have been 90 quid. Goodness knows what it would mean, because the developers are bidding on the basis that they will get constraint payments. So if they don't get the constraint payments, the strike price will be higher. So I agree with you, but I think it does lead to the question mark about whether there's too much wind as part of the system. And I really would like to know whether the Scottish Government agree with me that there must be a continuing backup in the form of gas and or nuclear, preferably both, in order to provide a balanced grid to maintain stability of the grid. And the stability is absolutely crucial, because if you lose that stability, that's when you get fluctuation volatility, as happened in Spain, I believe, over the summer, although causes of that are under dispute. But I mean, does the Scottish Government agree there must be backup of baseload, and that must be gas and or nuclear?
Spain, and I had a discussion at the time with someone when I was in Brussels about this, and actually it was the generation of wind capacity that actually brought that back online. But I take the point more generally, and I do agree that variety is very, very important, and I do agree that you know, as long as we are relying on gas for heat in our homes, that we need to be supplying it. I also think that the UK Government need to look at the injection of hydrogen into the gas grid as well. I think we've got that infrastructure in terms of all the gas pipelines, and you know, nearby my constituency is, you know, where that gas actually goes in, and they are ready to inject hydrogen into that pipeline as well, which would reduce the amount of emissions associated with it as well. I press the UK Government on more decision making around that. As long as we are using gas, we have to, you know, to look at how we bring down the carbon emissions associated with that as well. But we also have to look at the various electricity generating opportunities and storage opportunities we've got. It's everything, with one exception. And Fergus Ewing will know this very well. I know he's not in agreement with his former party's policy on this, but the SNP's party policy is this: we are against new nuclear. And one thing I would say is, regardless of where it's generated and how it's generated, electricity needs to fit on a grid. And the grid infrastructure is old and creaking. And until we have upgrades in that throughout the whole of the UK, that we will have this situation where we're paying developers to switch off generation.
Well,
I would just point out that we should stick within the context of the petitions that we are considering this morning, and
sure. I think
nuclear development isn't one of them. I just think it's point.
Well, I wasn't going to ask about nuclear, but I think underlying all the objections there are a series of wider principled concerns, and that's really why I'm asking the questions. I think lots of people would like answers too. And just, I mean, I'd like to just ask about community ownership in a minute, but just before we leave the topics of discussion, could I just put one point to you, Minister, which is this, that whilst the grid does require to be upgraded, most certainly the cost of upgrading the grid recently estimated at £4 trillion this week, although that's disputed by NESO, but that's the kind of scale of it. And the time scale of this work is going to take much, much longer than Mr Miliband or anybody else who supports it says. It's going to take decades, and therefore is the problem not that there may be solutions in the future like hydrogen, like nuclear fission, all sorts of possibilities, more storage, but it's all going to be too slow, because even if you support your policies and Mr Miliband's policies, the grid upgrade process is inevitably going to take much, much longer than he says it will. And, you know, the transition from wood to coal took 200 years. The transition from coal to oil, according to Daniel Yergin, the world's foremost energy expert, took 100 years. How can we expect to move from oil and gas to renewables in just a decade? It's just not on, is it? I mean, it's not going to happen. It's for the birds, and therefore the risks I've described are very serious risks and growing in severity.
I'm not here to answer for Ed Miliband. It's actually been the successive UK government's policies. The grid to infrastructure upgrades actually were the former government was actually put them in place as well. So I take the point. Everything like this takes a very long time, but the time to start is now.
I will return to you, but I just want to, I know David Russell's quite keen, and I'm also keen, I know David Torrance is going to cover an area, and I also want to bring in our guest member. I've always encouraged Cabinet Secretary for our colleagues across the Parliament to join us, petitions they're interested in, and Oliver Mandela's with us. But David Russell?
Yes, Cabinet Secretary, everybody agrees that we need energy security, but back to the initial planning consents for the over 49 megawatts, that don't you think that all schemes should go through the local authorities rather than the only up to 49, which are the smaller type schemes, have a less environmental impact, whereas over 49, whether it's over 49 or over 149, it doesn't matter. The larger schemes have a much bigger environmental impact, much more effect on local communities. So don't you think that everything should go through the local authority, and probably only appeals should be bypassing that?
I welcome your views, because obviously I think you're asking me the question about what my view is. The consultation is out there, and I look forward to seeing what David Russell puts in by way of submission to that effect, and the arguments surrounding to back up what I imagine is your opinion on it. That you know, there will be others that have that view as well. So my view is I want to hear the feedback from people about the consultation that we've put out there, to see what the general views coming back. I think it's also very important to hear the views from those that will be making those decisions, those councils and those councillors, that if they're opting to make, if they want to make all the decisions associated with energy developments, then, you know, if it's overwhelming, then of course we need to take that into account. There'll be some who don't hold that view. There might be many that don't hold that view. There might be communities that don't hold that view. So that's why we've done the consultation.
I know for a fact that one local planning authority, South Lanarkshire, would like a bigger say, because they're a scheme, I maybe digressing a bit, but in East Renfrewshire, but all the disruption will be South Lanarkshire. And both, because it's bigger than the 49, both local authorities have been bypassed. It's for battery storage, you know. So that aside, but just a comment.
as well, and I'm not talking about people in my party, and I'm not going to divulge who they were because it wasn't a public event, but I don't feel comfortable saying who they were, but had a completely different view, wanted the status quo to remain. You know.
Right.
So.
The other thing you'd mentioned away at the start in your open statement about community schemes, yes. Right? More community schemes, which is great. However, grid connections for local schemes is extortionate, and the time is, you know, it's 5 years plus. If you even did the local scheme, that you could wait for an eternity, the apparatus could be out of date before you actually get a connection, and you know, and it isn't really affordable, so it makes them less viable.
So this is one of the areas in which I think that there could be real movement made in terms of community benefit. So if a developer comes into an area that they've got maybe a wind farm development that they want to, they could work with the community for them to have their own community energy scheme for which they share their grid connection. I think that's, I mean, that would be an offer to a community. I think that would be, you know, could be welcome. You know, we're in a situation with regards to the grid as it is, that we've got substantial developments waiting very, very long time to be able to get grid connection. Or they've been told that it's at a certain time, and then there's been a review done, as there just has been recently, and then they're told it's actually 5 years or 10 years beyond what they've been told. And it means that community energy, small amounts of generation, are way at the back of the queue, you know. So I think there's ways and means in the exercise that we hopefully will be able to undertake once and I am wishful thinking, community benefit could be made mandatory. That could be one of the ways in which, one of the opportunities that there is for communities to get a benefit that's not so much of the kind of like money on the table type, and certainly not in the football strips for the local primary school type, as important as they are, but it's actually, can we facilitate you having your own community energy scheme that has access to the grid via a shared connection? These are opportunities that are out there as well, and these are opportunities that I think a lot of communities would be quite excited about for the reasons that you describe.
Now, David Torrance is going to be coming in on hydrogen. Mr Mandel, have you coming in on the back of areas we've been discussing currently?
Yes, I want to come in on the back
Oliver Mandel.
Thank you, Convener. I'm very grateful to yourself and for committee members for making space for a couple of quick questions. I want to come in off the back of what Maurice Golden had asked, around where communities say no, and also linked into Fergus Ewing, that kind of bad taste that does sit with communities. Because I think it's not just developers that are at fault. I think it's the Scottish Government, because I think community views are discounted within the process. They're given lower priority, and the system is fundamentally stacked in the favour of developers. And having sat through inquiries, I know exactly how communities feel. You see people turn up in flash suits, flash cars. They sweep into communities for weeks at a time. They sit there and they tell local people that they're not entitled to a view. They go through, in a dispassionate way, units of land on a map, and they tell people that the effects of these enormous wind farms are not significant, that there's nothing special about the local landscape, that for planning consideration to be given to local landscapes and to communities, the effects must be more than local. But these are people's homes, these are people's community, this is where people live, and they're told their views don't matter. They spend a huge amount of time participating. Community councils, as Fergus Ewing says, give these long and detailed objections talking about why these projects are unsuitable. And at the end of the process, people go, well, that's not part of the process, it doesn't matter, those views don't count for anything. So I guess my question is, would it not just be more honest to say to communities, this system works as is intended, and the Scottish Government favours going ahead with these projects no matter what?
No, it wouldn't be fair to say that at all. It wouldn't be fair to say that at all. And that's, I mean, you mentioned the flash cars and the flash suits. I mean, I assume that these are the people from the developers you're talking about.
Yes, I mean, they swoop in with teams of 10, 15 people. I mean, you know, what I think will be hundreds of thousands of pounds being spent pushing these applications through. You know, communities turn up in communities turn up in good faith, without proper representation, without a detailed understanding of the law. And to be fair, you know, I think the reporters do an excellent job to try and level the playing field. But people, you know, I've seen people in my own community turn up, you know, and talk about businesses they've had for a lifetime that serve, you know, serve tourism. They talk about, you know, landowners, farmers, local people talk about their knowledge of the hills and the water. People talk about the impacts of light at night, you know, on their residential amenity. They talk about why they moved to an area and what makes it special. I mean, they certainly don't move to many of these remote communities for a bus service or, you know, for access to a GP, you know, or to go to the cinema. You know, they've moved there because of something special about the landscape, and people come in, you know, if you're being paid a small fortune, you know, to tell them that that's nonsense. They humiliate them, they make them feel small, they make them feel like those things don't matter. And it's plain to see, you know, if you're living in one of these communities, you know, you can't build, you know, hundreds of turbines at 200 metres plus tall with red lights that flash at night and say to people, it's not going to have an effect on how you feel about where you live. It's not going to have an effect on your home. And that's what they do in order to try and convince the reporter that they're right, that the council's wrong, that the community council's wrong, and that all these local people are wrong.
So you've asked me about particular instances in your constituency in the chamber before, and I remember that you put to me that the representatives from various developments had been disrespectful to your constituents, and well, I think that's completely out of order, frankly. But it also lands weight to the fact that we need to make community engagement mandatory, and it has to have a code of practice associated with it, because at the moment that doesn't exist. Yeah, but with the process that does exist is the reporter who is completely and utterly independent of anyone. The reporter that's completely independent of any kind of, like, ministers don't get involved, and for very, very good reason. You know, the reporter is deployed when there is an objection of the type that you've mentioned, in order to make a dispassionate assessment.
If the reporter can only look at effects that are beyond the local, if the reporter has to look at things in the planning terms that are set out, they're not actually able to listen to the concerns of the community. You know, they are saying, you know, we've gone through these land units, and some experts have said, you know, that they're not of national significance. You know, that they're maybe of regional significance. There may be pockets within them that are worth protecting, but they have to take that broader look, and that effectively means just discounting those local views. Those local views don't have a place in the process because of the rules that have been put in place.
So all the planning regulations as that pertain to Scotland have been made by this Parliament, and also MPF4 has been put through by this Parliament as well. And these are all, and the regulations associated with the Electricity Act are obviously in statute as well. And there, of course, are statutory consultees that have, you know, put in their views, and everything is taken into account by the reporter. But Robert may be able to give a little bit more of the sort of like legal background as to how the reporter operates.
Yeah, I suppose the first thing that I'd maybe bring up is Cabinet Secretary previously referenced the Planning and Infrastructure Act that received royal assent on the 18th of December last year. And I think that one of the reforms within that goes some way to address some of the concerns that you just noted. I certainly wouldn't want to speak on behalf of reporters in the DPA, but I do know that they take considerable steps to try and make sure that the process is open, fair and transparent and so on. And I think it was the first petition that's on the list in terms of PE 1864 noted about that environment and how kind of fraught it can be for communities to go to. One of the reforms that has been brought in is that now, should a planning authority object to an application that has been made to Scottish ministers, reporters now no longer have to hold a full public inquiry in the same way that has been in the past. They will be able to, the reforms that have been brought in now replicate the Town and Country Planning Act, whereby reporters have the ability to kind of take a more focused view. They have a suite of options that would allow a more proportionate and compassionate look to be considered for particular applications, and hopefully that goes some way to addressing the concerns that you noted about your communities.
I mean, I want to make it clear that the reason why we pushed the incoming UK government to put these reforms in place around community engagement is exactly as a result of the kind of stories that you're telling me, you know, and because we don't have the ability in the devolved settlement to make mandatory things around community engagement, community benefit, and quite a lot of the levers associated with you know, these electricity infrastructure in particular developments. That's why we've put out good practice principles, but it's toothless, you know, because we don't have the mandated powers. So I think we're turning a corner, because since my engagement with the UK government energy minister, which very early on when they came in, these were the sort of things around the need to mandate in these two areas and to have not just principles, good practice principles, but actually have a code of practice associated with it that would help some of the issues that you have mentioned here. We have turned a corner because they've been consulted on, and again, the Planning and Infrastructure Bill is a real step change, an opportunity here to reform the process and to put those mandatory, I suppose, as conditions in place. The next step, of course, is mandating community benefit, which we talked about previously.
Yeah.
Final supplementary.
But in order for that engagement to be meaningful, there has to be the potential of the developer walking away at an early stage. And I think that's the problem, is ultimately many developers do engage, they get an answer they don't like, and they just keep going. Do you recognise, you know, that there are occasions where developers should walk away? And we've got examples of developers putting in repeat applications. They get knocked back even by the Scottish Government, by the ECU, and then they come back a few years later with the same land, with a slightly different proposal, and it all starts again. Do you think?
We need to look at each planning application on its own merit. But one of the things that I would say is that as a result of the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, and now Scottish ministers having the power to mandate in terms of community engagement, I'm going to be undertaking, and my officials and all stakeholders are going to be undertaking the view, a consultation and a process of discussing all these issues so that we can improve the process.
Okay, thank you. David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary, and to your officials. My question is around hydrogen and water production, and as you probably know, Cabinet Secretary, my constituency has probably had more investment than any other with Fife Energy Park, which is district heating and transportation, and Scottish Gas Network with H100, which I've got nearly 400 houses now will be heated and they will cook on hydrogen. So what assumptions have the Scottish Government done about water usage for hydrogen, and what engagement have you had with SEPA and Scottish Water? Because just now there's a need for it, but in the future there will be a greater need. As you mentioned, it could go into a grid. There's 25% I think the grid could take. They're talking about hydrogen power stations now, transportation, hydrogen trains, and in Germany they're making steel for hydrogen now in their plants. It gets a lot cheaper, so there will be a greater need for it.
Yeah, and getting back to what Fergus Ewing mentioned as well, there's an opportunity for constrained power to be used for turning into green hydrogen. So there's opportunities there, although we're yet to maybe see it at the scale at which we've got the potential. And obviously, yeah, your constituency, as you rightly say, H100 is really leading the way and proving the point that hydrogen could be safely used for heating homes. although a lot of people have different views on whether or not that is feasible from a cost basis. But they're wanting to prove the concept, and I was delighted to be able to visit them and have a look and see what they're doing as well. In terms of water usage in general, whether it's hydrogen or whether it's anything else, continually assessed by Scottish Water and SEPA. So the, hydrogen wouldn't be the only high water usage industry. You've also got, you've got breweries, you've got, distilleries, you've got a lot, very many high water usage industries in Scotland, and hydrogen would be another one. So we need to be making sure that not only have we got the volume and the capacity to allow that, and that would be done through a process of anyone who requires a great deal of water usage would have to be engaging with SEPA and Scottish Water as a result of their plans before they put it in, because obviously their business case will depend on it. So they would need to be able to assess whether or not they had the volumes that they needed, first of all, and that would be before they put in any planning application associated with what they're wanting to do. Water scarcity in general, I think, is becoming a more pressing issue in Scotland. Last year, we had record water scarcity, and river levels were very low in Scotland, and it was actually starting a lot earlier in the year than is usual. And SEPA, of course, give the licences for water abstraction from water courses, and quite a lot of the people who would ordinarily apply for those licences, like farmers, whatever, were told that they couldn't take water from water courses over a period of a number of months. The Scottish and Scottish Water are obviously monitoring the volumes in their reservoirs as well. And actually, up until fairly recently, up until the last couple of months, the reservoirs in Scottish Water were back to their normal level, apart from Dundee. I mean, people think that sunny Dundee is just something that a Dundonian came up with for a laugh, but actually it's genuinely true. The rainfall levels in the area of Dundee are a lot lower than the rest of Scotland. So the water scarcity in Dundee, and that's why Scottish Water have put a pilot in Dundee about household usage. So there's more general concerns in terms of Scottish Water and SEPA and the Scottish Government working together to have water scarcity reports, assessments about where water is needed, and whether it's hydrogen or whether it's anything else. Anything like, I mean, my own constituency, I've got Brewdog. All the beer from Brewdog is made in my constituency. Well, a lot of it, mainly it's the headquarters. And they had to engage with Scottish Water because they were wanting to expand and obviously required more water at the same time that the council were putting planning applications through for new housing developments. So there's that assessment at the local level as to what water was required in particular areas, and that would be the same for hydrogen. But in more general terms, I mean, I guess your question gives me the opportunity to go on a bit of a hobby horse of mine, is that we need to start in Scotland really treating our water as a precious resource. And just because it's rainy here doesn't mean to say that we have an abundance of water. We have the best water in the UK in terms of water quality, but it's not infinite. And it's not something that we need to take for granted. There's millions of pounds put in by Scottish Water to upgrade their facilities to stop the leakages associated with it, to bring down the emissions reduction associated with processing our water. And also SEPA are constantly monitoring our river sources and our water courses. And if there is a danger, I would imagine if our hydrogen producer, that they may invest an awful lot of money in terms and counting on water coming from a particular water course, that would have to be bottomed out with SEPA well before they put in any kind of planning application, until they actually, if they're in danger of being told by SEPA in the months of between April and September, you may not get a licence to take water. That's a pretty precarious position for their business to be in. So it's a combination of all those things, and it's not just applies to hydrogen, it applies to anyone who needs a water supply to run their business, or indeed a housing development, whatever it is.
On that point, I would just like to push you, Cabinet Secretary, because it looks like most of the hydrogen production will be down the East Coast because of the concentration of wind farms. Most of the water reserves and the vast water reserves are on the West Coast. And as you pointed out, There was water restrictions. Fife had them for months last year. So as an energy source of the future, how could we ensure that that water supply is there and get the investors there and it doesn't affect your traditional industries?
So Scottish Water have a very, very critical role to play in this in terms of the investment that they're putting into their infrastructure. They are very well appraised of you know, all potential requirements for the water that might be required for all communities. They'll get that through local councils, local development plans. There obviously will be very, very mindful of any kind of like particular developments that are happening that might need water associated with them as well. They know the Scottish Government's hydrogen strategy. They know about it. They know where all the predicting where the population growth will happen within Scotland, as well as the industrial growth will happen within Scotland. Of course, you can't predict projects. And I think that there's so many different actors in terms of whether hydrogen is actually going to become a big player in the energy industry in Scotland. A lot of it will depend on the market. A lot of the demand, what you're saying, there's demand for, a lot of it will depend on the infrastructure that might be required in order to get it to mainland Europe, where, you know, the Germans want to use it for creating steel, I think was mentioned as well, and they're looking to which countries can supply them with that. So there's an awful lot of different factors. So Scottish Water can't predict what applications are going to come in for high water usage, and it won't just be hydrogen. There'll be things like, you know, data centres that require coolants and water supplies as well. So they work very closely with the Scottish Government in terms of like green industrial strategy. I have very regular meetings with Scottish Water around a range of issues. But water scarcity and the work that Scottish Water, working with government and the public, do in terms of our general water usage, and I'm talking even at household level, is a message that needs to be got across. Water is not an infinite and cost-free resource. It costs money to get it to the quality it does, and also we don't want to waste it. And I think that that's a message that we need to be getting across. Of course, businesses are paying directly for their water, so they're very cognizant of the fact that they don't want to be wasting water as well. But we don't meter water at household level, as they do in England. And maybe as a result of that, which we don't really want to go down, you know, England, who do meter domestic water, people conserve water more. So I would much rather that the Scottish public actually would have a sort of like communications campaign, and Scottish Water does on this, to talk about just thinking about how much water you use and how you use it.
Thank you, Convener.
I'm going to bring Fergus Ewing back in a moment, but we do have one petition on pumped storage, hydro in Scotland and wild salmon, and I just wanted to touch on the issue arising from that, which is how you set out that impact assessments and hydro projects take into account the overall or cumulative effect to salmon populations.
Yeah, so SEPA are actually doing a bit of work on this at the moment. So I was interested to see this petition come through, and reached out to SEPA. They've got a working group that's actually dedicated to pump storage hydro in particular. And they're exploring all the challenges associated with pump storage hydro and sort of interaction with watercourses, whether they be lost, whatever. And they are looking at the cumulative impacts, the lack of existence of formal coordination agreements is something they're particularly looking at for developers that are working in the same body of water. And they're also looking at the impact of pumped storage hydro on fish more generally. And of course, that will include the subject of the petition as well. They're developing guidance for the consideration of the cumulative impacts, and I believe that they're going to be consulting externally on this. I don't know if they're consulting yet, but I can find out from them about when they're actually doing that. So there'll be an opportunity for the people that put forward the petition and people that are interested in this area to actually engage in this consultation and put forward their own knowledge about the impacts that they might feel it's harming.
Well, that would be very helpful, just to have any further detail in relation to that and any timescales that are envisaged for that review as it takes place.
We'll reach out to them, and if there's any, as and when there's any information, we'll pass it on to the committee.
We'd be very grateful for that. Fergus Ewing.
just following on from that particular point, Convener, I'm sure the Minister will know that there's several applications for pump storage projects around Loch Ness. And the concerns are, as we've heard, about salmon population, about angling, about recreational interests, about the level of the loch, the Caledonian Canal. There's a whole group of people who broadly are in favour of pump storage, but feel that the current planning rules do not allow, they prevent, in fact, the planning authority from taking a holistic view of the whole cumulative impact. So, whilst I welcome SEPA's working group, every time I hear about working groups, I think, well, something might happen in 5 years' time if you're really lucky. The problem is here and now, because these applications are submitted and they have to be determined. So the problem the petitioners have put, essentially, is that these applications will all be determined without the Council being able to do what the Minister just said should be done in a better system, namely to take into account of the cumulative impact. So how will we avoid the taking of decisions which may have significant adverse impacts on these existing interests of salmon fishing, angling in a wider sense, the marine environment, recreational interests and other loch users at the current time?
So obviously SEPA are yet to, obviously this is a process that is ongoing that SEPA are undertaking, and I don't have the the results of that process. And I also can't talk about live applications, Convener, which I think you know, so I'm not going to. But I think the fact that some of the issues that have been brought up in the petition and some of the issues that Fergus Ewing has mentioned around pump hydro storage and that cumulative multi-development, I suppose, potential, whatever it is something that SEPA are taking an active look at. And as I say, we'll find out from SEPA more about when they're due to report and where they're due to go out in consultation, but I'll leave it there.
We're into just our last few minutes, Mr Ewing, so if I could ask you to...
well, if I could just go back to community ownership, and the last petition was on energy strategy in general, which also covers this area. When I was Energy Minister, although community ownership was not something we could require, we didn't have the legal powers, and that remains the case, we did have a voluntary scheme which was funded by the REEF, the Renewable Energy Infrastructure Fund, and that was used to provide grants to communities to enable them to facilitate the purchase of a community share on a commercial basis from the developer. The way it would work is, if the cost of the community share was £100, REEF would provide £10, and a series of commercial banks, my recollection was Triodos, the Close Brothers, and the Co-op Bank would provide the 90%. So communities who don't have any money would be able to leverage a loan, buy a government grant, and the loan would be repaid from the income stream from the project. Local Energy Scotland did the groundwork so that developers weren't having to scamper around the country holding lots and lots of extra meetings and negotiate with communities. That was taken away from them, and it worked extremely well until ROCs were summarily withdrawn by the UK government when the whole thing fell apart. But what puzzles me, Minister, and I think I've raised this several times before, including in the Chamber, including with yourself, but here we are 5 years into this Parliament and nothing has happened, despite the fact that I think I did suggest to make this happen, and I did suggest on more than one occasion that the Scottish National Investment Bank could be encouraged to do this, because this is a commercial transaction. It's not a freebie. It's a commercial arrangement which will allow public money to lever in 1,000% more potential benefit. And then by doing that, some communities that presently are hostile to these developments would actually see some tangible benefit for themselves, their children, their grandchildren, and that perhaps might, in some cases, but not all cases by any means, some see this as a bribe, but others would welcome it. So mixed views, but what depresses me is that there's nothing been happening for the last 5 years, and you know, where are the voluntary schemes that we managed with help from officials to do when I was in your shoes?
Agree that nothing's been happening. The Community and Renewable Energy scheme is, in terms of the demand that there is from them, in terms of grants, loans and assistance associated with it, the demand was so high that when I first met with the Energy Minister from UK government that was coming in, he was talking about their local power plan, and I expressly said to him, don't reinvent the wheel, because we want to be able to expand the capacity of community and renewable energy because the demand is so high. And off the back of that, I'm very pleased to say I was able to secure funding to augment the capacity of Community Energy Scotland from GB Energy. As a result, which actually comes straight to CARES via the Scottish Government. And we also, the budget announced yesterday, we have made commitments around community energy as well. The other thing that I've done is repowering opportunities. Repowering opportunities on publicly owned land. We have put in place a scheme which effectively will give communities, I suppose, priority in applying for the repowering opportunities, working with CARES in order to do that. Now, that wasn't the case before. But the general point that Fergus Ewing makes about developers being able to work with communities to facilitate more community energy is exactly the sort of thing I want to see. It's exactly the thing I want to see happening with offers of not just, again, the money on the table, do with it what you will, but for those communities that want a community energy scheme and want to be able to leverage in private finance in order to be able to do that. I agree with Fergus Ewing that that is actually a really exciting potential of mandating community benefit. But here's the thing, there's nothing stopping developers from doing it now on a voluntary basis. And some have done this, actually, but I want to see more of it. Whether or not every community will want it, absolutely, it's up to them, and that's the whole point. And it gets back to Jackson Carlow's point. Communities should be able to decide how they utilise the community benefits. But there is no shortage of demand for community energy projects. There is no, I'm really trying my very level best to give more opportunities to communities to own their own energy. Forestry Land Scotland have got repowering opportunities, which we've actually set out. I haven't got them all in front of me, but there's a number of developments, repowering opportunities that I've actively said community energy schemes, community energy should take priority for communities for applying for these repowering opportunities, and CARES will assist them to do so.
I appreciate the answer, Minister. I appreciate your good intention, but I did suggest that the Scottish National Investment Bank could be a source of revenue, and that's what's required. And I can't help but notice that I think Mr David Ritchie is now in charge at the helm, and he used to be an official who worked for me in the Energy Department. So maybe a phone call to David would help to unlock the funding that is needed to move this up a scale, as you obviously would wish to do, and mean that the next session of Parliament we're not going to see 5 years without the significant progress that we would all like to see.
There has been significant progress in community energy, though, Mr Ewing. I have to put that on the record.
Draw that conversation to a conclusion. Just one, did we touch on this earlier? I'm not sure in the round, but the new energy strategy, is there a date you anticipate that being published by?
The energy strategy and just transition plan is out, obviously it's been out in draft. There are a number of things that we now bottom out in terms of what's happening with the results of Supreme Court judgments, particularly around oil and gas licensing. Now, obviously, oil and gas licensing is reserved to the UK government, but people expect us to take a view on it. There is no shortage of other energy policy documents out there in terms of our ambition around all sorts of energy, and obviously the draft energy strategy sits and is our energy strategy as put out to the public. But I've also got onshore wind statements, offshore wind statements, I've got hydrogen strategy, a great number of policy documents are out there already. You're asking the question as to when the energy strategy will be published. I can't give an answer to that.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, do you think it might be before the autumn of 2027 when these
I would hope, yeah, I would hope so, because obviously that's when the spatial energy.
Yes.
Absolutely, I hope that that's the case. We've had some curveballs recently, though. We've had the Finch verdict, and then we've had the various other Supreme Court verdicts, which we have to assess in order so that when we put our view on all of those things and what we think needs to happen, they need to be informed. So as long as there's no more major curveballs like that, then I would hope to.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Well, that's been a very constructive and engaging session this morning. It's been very helpful to the committee. Is there anything we've not touched on you want to say in conclusion, or have we covered the ground? I
just want to say how much I welcome to talk about all of these issues with you, and thank you for inviting me.
And thank you very much. Hopefully that will allow us to advance quite a number of the petitions that have had an opportunity to have the issues raised within them aired today. And with that, I will suspend briefly. And welcome back. And the next item of our agenda today is the consideration of continued petitions. And I'd like to highlight to those joining us this morning or watching online that we really still have a very considerable number of open petitions to consider before the dissolution of the Parliament and our final meeting in March. Our focus, therefore, now is very much on those areas where we feel we can make progress in the time remaining, notwithstanding the hugely important issues that underpin many of the petitions that we have to consider. And it simply won't be possible for us to advance in this session of Parliament the work of many of the petitions that we still deem to be of considerable importance, and that may well require fresh petitions to be submitted in the next Parliament. The first of the petitions we're going to consider this morning, in due deference to one of our guests this morning, who is currently outside in the hall, but is the petition number 2099 to stop the proposed centralisation of specialist neonatal units in NHS Scotland. And this petition has been lodged by Lynn McRitchie. It calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to stop the planned downgrading of established and high-performing specialist neonatal intensive care services across NHS Scotland from a level 3 to a level 2, and to commission an independent review of this decision in light of contradictory expert opinions on centralising services. Now, just before the Christmas recess, we considered this petition on the 10th of December, and at that point we took considerable evidence from the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health, Jenny Minto. During the evidence session, we covered a number of issues, including capacity and resilience, engagement with families, funding, and the importance of family-centred care. Now, the Scottish Government has provided follow-up information on the number of beds in the 3 units that will be intensive care units under the new model, and the submission notes that the modelling work recommended additional beds in each unit. And that's recommended to be an additional 10 in Glasgow, 10 to 12 that is, 4 in Edinburgh and 1.5 in Aberdeen. But I would say that those were the anticipated additional increases in the plan and not as a result of any further consideration arising from the airing of these issues in committee. And therefore, the concerns of clinicians still stand, I imagine, because they were aware of that potential increase in capacity, notwithstanding the concerns they have about overall capacity. Now, the committee has received a new written submission from the petitioner, which highlights sections from the Best Start report, which emphasises the importance of family-centred care. The petitioner compares this with the Scottish Government's focus on clinical decision-making, and she states that the Scottish Government continues to cherry-pick information contained in the report, disregarding the parts of it which set out a vision of truly family-centred care. The submission also reiterates concerns about families not being listened to during the focus group sessions and in meetings with the Scottish Government. So, the recess has taken place in the intervening period, but our discussions on these matters with the Cabinet Secretary, with the Minister, are still fresh in our mind, I know. Do members have any suggestions in the light of that, how we might now proceed? Davy Russell?
I suggest that we write to the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health, highlighting the areas of concern that still remain outstanding, as identified through the oral evidence in the petitioner's most recent submission.
And I know that we did have a discussion on the evidence after the last meeting, and we did identify a number of areas of concern. I think it's fair to the Minister to say that she did engage directly with us on the issue, and she and some of the clinicians did make a powerful case in some respects, but I think there were still, for the committee, areas of concern that remained. And I think they really do deserve to be pursued. So I am of-minded that this is a petition that requires to stay open at the present time, and we do need to pursue these issues. We have a little time in hand. I see Megan Gallagher is with us this morning. Is there anything you'd like to say, Megan, even though I have said that it might be less likely that members are going to get called?
I'm very grateful, Convener, and I just want to convey my thanks to the committee for their work on this particular petition. I know from working with the families and certainly being part of the debates on this issue how sensitive it is. However, that being said, there are still some real concerns that have not been addressed by the Minister or indeed the Scottish Government, some of which have already been touched upon. But if I may stress on the number of beds, Convener, because it is a really important point and it's something that I've been trying to pursue with the Minister, because at the moment, in terms of neonatal wards, for every 10 babies born, there is only 1 bed for parents to stay over. Now, if this centralisation or downgrading, however you want to term it, takes place, there is a real risk that parents will not be able to stay close by their babies, who are very vulnerable, very sick. And that, for me, is not the right care. It's not the right way in which we should be treating families who are in this very difficult position. So I would ask the committee, if they can, to please continue on with this petition for the sake of the families, but also for any future families who need to use these vital services. And just if I very may, on the last point, there was termed within the report that they could have between 3 and 5 specialised units. I do believe it is for the Scottish Government to explain why it's 3 and not 5, because I think if there was 5, that would certainly give families a little bit more reassurance in terms of where they would go should their babies need that specialised care. But I appreciate the time for a very short contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ming Gallagher. Colleagues, are we content to support David Russell's recommendation that we keep the petition open and we pull together the various outstanding themes in a submission to the Minister? Are we agreed? We are. Thank you. We continue this morning's meeting by considering a number of petitions which raise concerns and call for action on healthcare matters. Colleagues will remember that on the 24th of September we took evidence from the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care across a number of themes. And after the evidence session, the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care did follow up in writing to the committee on a number of outstanding issues. So this morning we're going to consider the petitions which sit under the theme of capacity, skills and training. And then we will consider a petition on the theme of post-COVID-19 impacts and response. The committee has explored the specific issues raised in the petitions by seeking written evidence from stakeholders and ministers. The thematic issues have also been explored in our recent oral evidence with the Cabinet Secretary. So I'll provide an overview of the evidence received in each petition since it was last considered, and then we'll move to decide what action to take on those petitions. Petition 2053, to stop the cuts to community link workers and help secure their long-term future within GP practice teams, was lodged by Peter Coston on behalf of Scottish GPs at the Deep End. It calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to take action to ensure that the number of hours of current community link workers serving the poorest communities are not cut in the next financial year, and to take binding steps to secure long-term funding for community link workers in GP practices across Scotland. This was last considered ahead of the oral evidence with the Cabinet Secretary on October 24. We wrote to the Scottish Government at that point. The response explored the potential to baseline the Primary Care Improvement Fund, via which most community link worker CLW services are funded from the 26-27 financial year. And the written response to that also confirmed that officials began a review of the CLW policy overseen by the CLW Advisory Group, and that any changes arising from this two-year review would be introduced in a phased manner. And the Cabinet Secretary confirmed that review was still underway in the evidence that he gave. Petition number 2078 to introduce mandatory licensing and inspection of private ambulance service providers, lodged by Ryan McNaughton, calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to create a new body responsible for the inspection, assessment and licensing of private ambulance service providers, or encompass the clinical governance management of private companies in Scotland into Healthcare Improvement Scotland. And we last considered this earlier last year in February. We agreed to write to the Cabinet Secretary then. In his response, he stated that engagement with Healthcare Improvement Scotland and scoping of relevant stakeholders began in 24, but it was due to resume in 25. And at the evidence session, he stated his understanding that this would go to public consultation in 2026 in the next parliamentary session. Petition number 2091 to provide funding to have CAMS worker and nurse based within Scottish high schools, lodged by Kirsty Solomon on behalf of Stand With Kyle Now, calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to provide funding to enable a CAMS worker and a school nurse to be placed within our secondary schools. We considered this in April last year, agreed to write to the Minister for Social Care, Mental Wellbeing and Sport, and the Minister's response states that the 18-week CAMS standard has been met for the first time, with 90.6% of children and young people starting treatment within 18 weeks of referral. The submission also highlights work underway which will create better cohesion between school nursing teams and associated services such as CAMS. Petition 2126 to ensure abortion services are available up to 24 weeks across all parts of Scotland, lodged by Gemma Clark, called on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to ensure abortion services are available up to the 24th week of pregnancy across all NHS boards in Scotland. And we considered this in February last year as well, wrote to the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health. The Minister states that her expectation is for an NHS service to be established, but that the Government is not unwilling to consider commissioning a non-NHS organisation to deliver this instead. The Minister also indicated that as part of the work of NHS National Services, Scotland's National Services Division, a number of private providers were contacted, but they indicated they would not be able to host this service. We also received a submission from Abortion Rights Scotland, who strongly believe that this service should be provided within the NHS by NHS staff. Finally, the petitioner states that despite the Minister's assurance back in November that the Government was working with health boards to ensure the service was implemented as swiftly as possible, no information about the recommended service model has been shared, and she remains concerned about a lack of transparency in the Government's approach to the matter. Petition number 2128 to increase funding for post-mastectomy delayed breast reconstructions and ensure that waiting time information is accurate. This was lodged by Christy Esselmont, and it calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to provide additional funding to reduce waiting times for post-mastectomy delayed breast reconstructions in Scotland, and to assess whether the communication section of its waiting times guidance is being followed by health boards. Now, we last considered this petition on the 19th of February last, when we agreed to write to the Scottish Government, and during the evidence session with the Cabinet Secretary, recognised the issue raised by the petitioner and highlighted the demand on cancer treatment services. The Cabinet Secretary stated that the Scottish Government is working with relevant health boards to ensure the recruitment of specialist surgeons. Therefore, in respect of the petitions I've just identified, 2053, 2078, 2091, 2126 and 2128. Do colleagues have any suggestions as to what we are now able to do? David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. In light of the time left to committee, I wonder if we can consider closing the petitions under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the committee has progressed the issue raised in the petition as far as possible in this parliamentary session. Raise relevant issues as part of a thematic evidence session with the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care.
Our colleagues agreed. We thank all of the petitioners for raising the issues that they have with us. Some we've made greater progress on with others, but the time left to us in this Parliament doesn't allow us to do more. Now, one issue we did discuss at that session, which sits rather apart, so I'm discussing separately, is petition number 2871, to take action to protect people from airborne infections in health and social care settings. This petition was lodged by Sally Witcher and calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to improve air quality in health and social care settings through addressing ventilation, infiltration and sterilisation, to reintroduce routine mask wearing in those settings, particularly respiratory masks, to reintroduce routine COVID testing, to ensure staff manuals fully cover preventing airborne infection, to support ill staff to stay at home, and to provide public health information on the use of respiratory masks and the HEPA air filtration against airborne infections. Now, we last considered this petition on the 5th of March 2025, when we agreed to write to the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care. In a response issued by the Chief Nursing Officer Directorate, the Scottish Government reiterated that it has no role in the development of the National Infection Protection and Control Manual, the NIPCM, or the Care Home Infection Prevention and Control Manual, the CHIPCM. It notes that antimicrobial resistance and healthcare-associated infection, Scotland, are the National Clinical Infection Prevention and Control experts, and highlights the ARHAI's response within its submission. During the evidence session with this in September, the Cabinet Secretary said he would write to the committee with a timescale for publication of the Infection Prevention and Control Strategy. In his letter of the 30th of October, the Cabinet Secretary states that a 10-year IPC strategic vision and priorities statement is being developed collaboratively by the Scottish Government's IP Strategic Development and Oversight Group by spring 2026. In her most recent submission, the petitioner considers that the pandemic and its cumulative health impacts remain ongoing, and that this is being ignored by the Government. She notes that this winter, the NHS has again been overwhelmed by airborne infection, and argues that much of this could have been avoided had actions and measures suggested within the petition been put in place. She adds that she can still find no evidence of expert input and quality assurance on infection prevention or control, and questions the accuracy and completeness of the ARHAI's advice. Colleagues, we have the further submission from the petitioner. We have the follow-up from the Cabinet Secretary confirming the publication of the infection and control strategy by spring of this year. Do colleagues have any views as to what more we are able to do at this stage, given the Cabinet Secretary's letter saying that there will be a published document in spring 26, which of course will be after this Parliament has dissolved. I don't know whether colleagues feel there's more we can do in this Parliament. Do I have any suggestions? Mr Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. In light of evidence before us and with the publication of the document once the Parliament has finished, I wonder if we could close the petition under 15.7 of standing orders, but ask if petitioner in the new session of Parliament if he would like to bring a petition back.
Thank you. I believe the petitioner is probably with us in the gallery today. I do think the issues continue to be important, but given the Cabinet Secretary's response, I suspect there's nothing further we can do in the time left available to us. So, with a suggestion that that petition be resubmitted to the new Parliament, but that we reluctantly close it at this point, our colleagues can agree on that course of action. We are. Thank you. And I thank the petitioner for raising the issues, and I hope that they can be pursued when Parliament reassembles. We move on to consider a number of petitions which raise concerns and call for action on issues related to emergency cardiac and stroke care. And since the last formal consideration of each of these petitions, the committee took oral evidence from the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health on the themes raised across these petitions. And that session took place on the 12th of November 2025. 1989, to increase defibrillators in public spaces and workplaces, has been lodged by Mary Montague. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to support the provision of defibrillators in public spaces and workplaces. We last considered the petition ahead of the evidence session on the 7th of May 25. During oral evidence, the Minister highlighted the importance of optimal defibrillator placement and pointed to the new PAD map tool, which shows the location of public access defibrillators and identifies the areas where defibrillators are most needed. The evidence session highlighted that the location, ease of access and continued upkeep of defibrillators are all important considerations, and the committee noted that there is a reliance on community fundraising and external sponsorship to provide and maintain public defibrillators. The issue of bystander confidence was raised during the evidence session with the Minister, highlighting the importance of engagement work through the Save a Life for Scotland stakeholders. I mean, I think there was some interesting evidence from the Minister in relation to how deficiencies in the PAD map can be addressed, but also fairly structured arguments as to why just a blanket approach that defibrillators should be located in any one particular place might not prove to be appropriate. But I wonder if colleagues have any suggestions as to how we might proceed in the light of the evidence we heard. Maurice Golden.
Thank you. I think very similar to Mr Torrance's comments with the last petition, I think that we're at the stage where we've explored this particular issue as much as we can, and I think I would urge the petitioner, if they so wish, to bring this back in the new session.
Okay. And obviously we did raise these matters with the Minister, and they do actually support some of the aims within the petition, so it's a case of actually demonstrating progress. Do colleagues support the recommendation? We do. Petition number 2048 to review. Sorry. We'll close that petition, yes. Petition number 2048 to review the Fast Stroke Awareness Campaign. This has been lodged by James Anthony Bundy, who I think is with us in the gallery again this morning. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to increase awareness of the symptoms of stroke by reviewing its promotion of the Fast Stroke campaign, ensuring that awareness campaigns include all the symptoms of a potential stroke. We last considered this petition on February 25, and we agreed to write to the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health, NHS Fife, NHS Ayrshire and Arran, Chest, Heart and Stroke Scotland, the Scottish Ambulance Service and the Chartered Institute of Marketing. And the committee previously heard concerns that moving from fast to be fast could produce false positives, and it could have a concerning impact on clinicians' ability to treat strokes. Not a universally shared view, but one that was expressed. A submission received from NHS Forth Valley mentioned a range of fast stroke awareness initiatives that it has been supporting locally, and it highlighted that its emergency department has been using the BFAST stroke assessment tool since early 24. NHS Forth Valley underlined that it has not yet been able to undertake any formal evaluation of the impact of these initiatives. And in the evidence session we had in November with the Health Minister, Jenny Minto, we heard her say that the government will converse with the Health Board to understand what it is doing, where it is in the pilot, and when we can expect a report. We found the Minister's suggestion that the government is keeping its current position under review quite encouraging, I think, because I don't know that we'd had that expressed to us in writing previously. And we were also impressed that the Minister had been actively engaged in these issues with a number of individuals concerned with it. Additionally, the Minister highlighted that following a meeting with the petitioner, by way of an example, the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care asked the Stroke Speciality Advisor to the Chief Medical Officer to review stroke awareness education for clinical staff. This then led to the Scottish Government developing and funding an educational programme package for general practices, emergency departments and the Scottish Ambulance Service, which also covers the less common presentations of stroke, and these are important, including symptoms relating to certain presentations of loss of balance and visual field defects, the B&E aspects of the BFAST programme. Again, a very important petition that we've considered in this Parliament. Colleagues, David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. Can I thank the petitioner for bringing the petition to committee? I do believe that significant progress has been made with the Scottish Government. So I would ask if the committee would like to consider closing the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the committee has raised relevant issues as part of a thematic evidence session with the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health. Following engagement with the petitioner, the Scottish Government has funded a stroke education package for NHS staff, which also covers the less common presentations of a stroke. And the Scottish Government has committed to undertake an assessment of NHS Forth Valley use of BFAST for stroke screening to understand what learning can be applied to stroke awareness work more generally. In doing so, in closing the petition, I would like the committee to write to the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health to highlight substantial work undertaken by the committee on this and other relevant petitions.
So, are we agreed? So I think we thank the petitioner very much. It's been one of the important petitions we've considered during the course of this Parliament. Mr Ewing.
Yeah, I support Mr Torrance's recommendation. Just to add that the work done in the Forth Valley, which I think is described as the best performing health board in this area, will then inform further procedure and whether FAST be changed to BFAST inter alia. So if that work is, as I understand it, the work is current and took place in October, so if that work is completed fairly soon, it will be open to the petitioner to review whether in the next session of Parliament a fresh petition might be brought forward, because I think that's some of these achievements have arisen because of the petitioner and the consideration by this committee. So it's very much a moving story and development of policy, I hope, for the next session of Parliament to consider.
And we understand the issues which underpinned the raising of the petition in the first place. They're known to us in the Parliament. Are colleagues content that we proceed on that basis, notwithstanding we are? Thank you very much. For the avoidance of doubt, can I just return to petition number 1989? I assume when Mr Golden said a similar action, he meant the closure of the petition at that point, and colleagues were content with that proposal? We were. Petition number 2067 to improve data on young people affected by conditions causing sudden cardiac death. Another petition that, of course, is well known to the Parliament, lodged by Sharon Duncan, and, of course, it raised by the loss of her son and our colleague David Hill. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to commission research to establish how many people aged 14 to 35 are affected by conditions that cause young sudden cardiac death, clarify the number of people who die annually in Scotland from these conditions, and set up a pilot study to establish if voluntary screening can reduce deaths. We last considered this petition on the 5th of March 25, where we agreed to write to the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care and to the Italian Embassy. We then took evidence from the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health on the 12th of November and agreed to consider the evidence at a future meeting. Now, the submission from the Consulate General of Italy in Edinburgh highlights evidence of screening leading to an 89% decrease in the incident rate of sudden cardiac death amongst young competitive athletes, a figure I think the committee found quite compelling. The Scottish Government reiterated that it adheres to UK National Screening Committee guidance in this area. The UK NSC evidence summary shows that international guidelines do not recommend population-level screening, though they do support pre-participation screening in competitive athletes. We understand that the UK NSC considered the study highlighted by the Consulate General of Italy in its 2019 review, and the NSC is now conducting a new review of relevant evidence over the following 3 years. As the evidence session in November, the Minister informed us that the 2025 Scottish Cardiac Audit Programme has included data on inherited cardiac conditions for the first time. Additionally, we heard that there is work ongoing to develop a proof of concept for a sudden cardiac death registry, with the aim to include preliminary data in next year's SCAP, Scottish Cardiac Audit Programme. We also heard from British Heart Foundation that it has funded clinical nurse specialists' sudden cardiac death roles to expand and roll out a successful West of Scotland pilot to implement a new clinical pathway for sudden unexpected death, sudden cardiac death and out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. The aim is to achieve full national coverage by the end of the 24-month period, with progress being monitored throughout. Do colleagues have any suggestions as to how we proceed with this petition in the light of all that? David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. In light of evidence before us, I wonder if the committee would consider closing the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the committee has raised relevant issues as part of a thematic evidence session with the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health. The most recent Scottish Cardiac Audit Programme has included data on inherited cardiac conditions for the first time. There is work ongoing to develop a proof of concept for a sudden cardiac death register, with the aim to include preliminary data in the next year's Scottish Cardiac Audit Programme. And the Scottish Government adheres to UK National Screening Committee guidance, and the UK NCS will be reviewing relevant evidence over the next 3 years. In closing the petition, the committee could write to the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health to highlight the substantial work undertaken by the committee on this and other relevant petitions.
Okay, another painful petition that we've wrestled with over the lifetime of the Parliament, but given the situation we're in, do colleagues support the petition? Mr Ewing?
Yes, another tragic case, and one where the statistics about the number of people who lose their lives of having heart attacks out with hospital, and the way in which access to CPR and a defibrillator massively increases the chance of survival, or every minute without that treatment reduces the level of survival by a staggering 10%. I mean, I just thought I'd mention that because 3,752 people's lives are at stake if they don't have access. So I'm quite sure, Convener, this issue will come back to our successor committee, and rightly so. And I think that the work has been done has allowed a real focus on the detail of the issues, which is to be welcome. And I guess our heart just goes out to the families involved in these cases.
Thank you. Yes, we thank Sharon Duncan and all of David's family, Roger, his father, and all those who have so assiduously pursued the aims of this petition during the course of this Parliament.
Particularly dogged in pursuit.
Yeah. Are we content, therefore? We are. Petition number 2101 to provide defibrillators for all primary and secondary schools in Scotland, lodged by Peter Earle on behalf of Tregear Primary School. We last considered this petition on the 7th of May. We agreed to invite the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health to give evidence. During the oral evidence, the Minister highlighted the importance, as I said a short time ago, of optimal defibrillator placement and pointed to the new PAD map tool, which shows the location of public access defibrillators and identifies where there are shortcomings and they are yet most needed. The Minister stated that during a meeting with the First Minister, Roger and Leslie Hill, the proposal in this petition was discussed. The DH9 Foundation, funded by Roger and Leslie Hill, and the Save a Life for Scotland partnership subsequently recommended taking a data-driven and localised approach to increase defibrillator access. The committee asked whether all children could be taught CPR in schools. The Minister committed to discussing this with the Cabinet Secretary for Education and Schools. Do we have any suggestions as to how we might proceed? David Russell.
In light of the evidence we've received, recommend to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the committee has raised the relevant issues as part of the thematic evidence session with the appropriate Minister for Women's Health. And while there is potential benefits to providing schools with public access defibrillators, this may only have a limited impact in some local authority areas, and the Scottish Government supports using the strategic PAD map tool to ensure pads are placed where they are most likely to be used. In closing the petition, the committee could write to the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health to highlight the substantive work undertaken by the committee on this and other relevant petitions.
Okay, thank you. I think the location of schools was the issue raised by Mr Golden during questioning, and it did follow that a lot of schools are now being built on out-of-town locations, and therefore defibrillators wouldn't necessarily be of available access to the local community in those circumstances, and therefore they might not be the most appropriate place for the defibrillator to be cited. In the light of Mr Russell's recommendation, are colleagues content to agree? Okay. We are. Petition number 1900 to access to prescribed medication for detainees in police custody lodged by Kevin John Lawson. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to ensure that all detainees in police custody can access their prescribed medication, including methadone, in line with existing relevant operational procedures and guidance. We last considered this petition on the 18th of June last year, when we agreed to write to the Minister for Drugs and Alcohol Policy and Sport. In her response, the Minister indicates that the Government intends to commission another survey similar to the rapid review previously conducted. That was scheduled to commence in late 2025. The Minister added that NHS Grampian had confirmed that opioid replacement therapy was available at Kitty Brewster Suite, with some logistical challenges being addressed to extend the service to the 2 remaining custody suites. However, in his most recent submission, the petitioner also refers to logistical challenges, informing us that NHS Grampian are still not providing methadone to detainees in custody at Elgin and Fraserburgh. He also suggests that at Kitty Brewster, detainees will not receive methadone for the 48 hours, so detainees who have been prescribed methadone will instead be given dihydrocodone for those first 48 hours. Do members have any suggestions or comments for action? I think there may still be time to do a little bit more with this petition. Can I suggest then we write to the Minister for Drugs and Alcohol Policy and Sport to highlight the petitioner's ongoing concerns about the issues within NHS Grampian, and actually to request an update before the end of this parliamentary session on the findings of the most recent survey rapid review, which was to be conducted towards the end of 2025, because it seems that this is still not happening and people are having to wait. And that's not what we understand is supposed to be happening. So I think we could still challenge the government in the time available to us. Are colleagues content to proceed on that basis? Mr Ewing.
I strongly support that. I think the lack of response has been pretty lamentable, pretty woeful actually, and not good enough. So, you know, I very much endorse your recommendation, Convener, and I really hope that bodies will respond to this committee more timelessly in future in the next session of Parliament, and if they don't, they get named and they get called out, because it's really not fair to the petitioners that when they come here for us to be their voice, they don't get reasonably prompt and detailed and relevant answers, and that's been too frequent an occurrence in this session of Parliament, I think.
Well, on this occasion, in fact, action that was supposed to be taking place still yet to happen. Mr. Russell.
Another thing is Police Scotland's involvement in this. Because I presume that the detainees are in their premises. That it would be worthwhile, maybe.
Well, I think it would be dangerous for us to broaden the scope of our inquiry at this stage, but to focus very much on trying to get a return on the issues that we actually have made progress on. And this one, I think there's still, given the review is taking place at the end of the year, a chance for us to get some further commitment before Parliament dissolves. So are we content to proceed? We are on that basis. Thank you. Petition number 2075 to prioritise local participation in planning decisions. Oh, gosh. A familiar theme. Lodged by Stuart Noble on behalf of Helensburgh Community Council. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to prioritise local participation in planning decisions affecting their area by providing a clear and unambiguous definition of the word local insofar as it applies to planning legislation, giving decision-making powers to community councils for planning applications in their local areas, ensuring that the way in which decisions and planning applications are taken is compatible with the provisions and ethos of the Community Empowerment Act of 2015. We last considered this position on the 19th of March last. We agreed to write to the Scottish Government. The Government's response highlights the statutory position of community councils as set out in the Community Empowerment Scotland Act 2015, which is that of consultees on matters affecting the area of representation rather than statutory decision takers. The Scottish Government argues that extending the definition of planning authority to include community councils for certain applications would fundamentally change the role of these councils and their relationship with the community they represent. In the Government's view, this could potentially reduce opportunity for community participation in the planning system, which is contrary to the spirit, aims and intentions of the 2015 Act, unquote. The Government adds that its Democracy Matters process, which is designing more empowered community decision-making processes, will move to an implementation phase early in the next Parliament. And regarding the committee's ask for review on planning application decisions being devolved to the relevant local area committee, the response highlights that existing planning legislation does not prevent a planning authority from adopting such an approach for most applications, and it would therefore be an operational matter for the relevant planning authorities to consider. The petitioner's additional submission highlights the less than satisfactory experience within his local area, though I would highlight that the committee's focus in discussing petitions has to be on national policy issues. Do members have any suggestions or comments as to how we might proceed? Mr Torrance.
In light of evidence from the Scottish Government, I wonder if a committee could consider closing the petition under Rule 15.7 on standing orders on the basis that the Scottish Government does not believe that extending planning decision-making powers to Community Council is compatible with the role and with the aims of the Community Empowerment 2015 Act. Existing legislation allows for decisions on planning applications to be made by relevant local area committees, with such an approach being an operational matter for individual local authorities. And the committee has pursued the aims of the petition as far as it is possible to during this current parliamentary session.
Are members content? We are. So again, we close the petition and thank the petitioner. And that was the last of our continued petitions this morning. We now come to agenda item 4, which is the consideration of new petitions. Before I introduce the first of our new petitions, I should, as I always do, begin by highlighting the fact that both the Scottish Government are invited to express a view on the petition, and we also go to SPICE, the Scottish Parliament's independent research service, for them to bottom out some of the issues that are raised within the petition before us. Now, I have explained already earlier in the meeting that given where we are in the parliamentary session, the committee's focus now is on identifying issues that we feel we can make significant progress on before the end of this Parliament. There are only being 6 meetings of the committee left, and the agenda for most of those meetings already now set. However, the first of these new petitions is on an important matter of public policy that is very much in the eye of the public at the present time, and that is petition 2190 to hold an inquiry into grooming gangs in Scotland, lodged by Mandy McGurk. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to commission an independent grooming gang inquiry to identify and understand the prevalence of child grooming in Scotland. The Scottish Government's response to the petition states that it is prepared to give every consideration to an inquiry if it is deemed to be necessary. The response also highlights the National Child Sex Abuse and Exploitation Strategic Group, which brings together key services and expert stakeholders. The submission notes that there is currently no comprehensive national data on the prevalence of child abuse in Scotland. Therefore, the Scottish Government is working to address this. Police Scotland has taken forward a series of actions to review its operations in response to this issue, including the creation of a timeline of action on child sex exploitation since 2012. Now, since the Scottish Government issued its initial response to this petition, it announced that an independent national review of responses to group-based child sex abuse and exploitation would take place, and this review has begun. Ministers plan to update Parliament more fully on this review by the end of February. In addition to this, the Scottish Government has announced financial investment and support for victims and families impacted by sexual offending, access to training for professionals, and improvements to Police Scotland's forensic capabilities. So, important issues raised clearly within the petition. Mr Torrance?
I wonder if the committee would consider keeping the petition open and write to the Cabinet Secretary for Education to ask whether a February update on the work of a national review group will include a decision on whether to launch an inquiry into group-based child sex abuse and exploitation.
I think we could seek to try and achieve that in the time remaining to us, and depending on the outcome, this may be a petition that we feel has a lot of work ahead that could potentially be part of the legacy document we leave to the next committee. So we'll keep the petition open and write to the Cabinet Secretary on that basis. Are we all agreed? We are. Petition number 2196 to address early sexual offending in Scotland, lodged by Leanne Kelly on behalf of Root the Rod. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to act on early sexual offending in young people and prevent future offending by taking tougher action on gateway offences such as unsolicited sexual images and peer assaults, educating young people about consent and online harms at school, creating a culture of parental accountability, introducing a youth monitoring register for offences committed by young people, and providing real support for victims of all sexual offences. The Scottish Government's response to the petition sets out frameworks and approaches which aim to address the issues raised in the petition. They include Equally Safe, a programme which focuses on gender-based violence, Bairns House, which provides a child-centred approach to delivering justice care and recovery for children, Mentors in Violence Prevention, a peer mentoring programme in secondary schools, and Parent Club website, which provides information to parents online. The Scottish Government states that it has no intention of introducing a youth monitoring register. The petitioner has written 2 written submissions to the committee. She states that the petition addresses a critical gap in Scotland's response to early offending, where non-contact offences are minimised, interventions are delayed, and parental accountability is inconsistent. The petitioner's second written submission states that while the Scottish Government has outlined relevant frameworks, it is not demonstrated that these measures are preventing sexual harm in practice. The submission provides a number of illustrative examples for our consideration. The petitioner concludes by stating that when early sexual offending by adults or children is minimised, escalation is not an accident, it is a predictable outcome. Do members have any comments or suggestions for action? Mr Torrance?
Thank you. I know the time is short for a committee, but I would still like to keep the petition open. And I wonder if the committee would consider writing to the Scottish Government to ask, in light of the petitioner's ongoing concerns, in what ways it is assessing the effectiveness of the preventive measures currently in place and what more can be done to improve this.
So, any other comment? Mr Ewing?
I'd very much endorse that, especially as the petitioner has outlined in her own pretty horrible experience. This is a kind of relatively modern crime that's become a thing over the past few years, I think, and of increasing concern that it might start off as not too serious, but can very rapidly ruin people's lives and cause people to even take their own lives, I've read, in some circumstances. So I think this is a kind of newish and alarming development in the sad history of sexual offences. So I very much would like to see what the Scottish Government's thoughts are about how it can be tackled. And I don't know whether the Lord Advocate might be also asked to offer any advice about these matters.
Okay, we can take that forward. Are we agreed? We are. That brings us to the end of our public session this morning. The second meeting of 2026 and an additional meeting, as colleagues will be aware of the committee, will take place next Wednesday, the 21st of January. And we now move into private session.